The Ghost Recon franchise has gone through a roller coaster of good and bad times in recent years, dividing the opinions of the fanbase. But which of their more recent titles is better, Breakpoint or Wildlands? Not sure? Let's take a look. It became immediately apparent to us after reviewing both Breakpoint and Wildlands that there's a split of opinion with regards to which is better, and what effect the release of Breakpoint may have had on the franchise as a whole. At a quick glance, both titles bear a decent resemblance to one another. However, when you get into them, the differences start to show very quickly, even more so for the veterans of the franchise who have dedicated much of their playtime to them. And it's the differences to this day that we want to explore, because it's clear that the history of these titles and what conditions they were in from release seem to be a source of these polarised opinions.
Ghost Recon Wildlands released back in 2017, and being the first open world Tom Clancy game, the concept alone started to split the fans of the franchise. It was marketed to be a sprawling third-person tactical cover-based shooter, spanning jungles, mountains, salt flats and deserts, all of which are accessible to play straight away with no loading screens. The fundamental design was a far cry from the games like Rainbow Six and the previous Ghost Recon titles, and this meant that fans were divided into those looking forward to an open-world tactical shooter, and those who believed it to be too much of a deviation from the games they know and love. But regardless of whether or not the game met the community's expectations, it did ultimately find its place among gamers, and a lot of people enjoyed the game and still do to this day. I got Wildlands soon after release, and I played it co-op with my brothers, putting hundreds of hours into liberating Bolivia. Cut to 2019 and Ubisoft released Ghost Recon Breakpoint, the successor to Wildlands and Ubisoft's project to give the market a new injection of life. At launch, to be honest, this game was a bit of a mess. Features like the loot level system, game-breaking bugs, the need to be online at all times, and a host of other technical issues meant that players looking to jump from Wildlands into a new adventure were left unsatisfied. Unfortunately, it seemed like Breakpoint was to fall victim to the time pressures, and the need to get the product to market without the necessary testing and development time. However, and this is a big however, the game today is magnitudes better. And in my opinion, Ubisoft deserve credit in the way they took almost every widespread complaint and worked on improvements, tweaks and updates to make the game something that the audience wanted. And I personally think they succeeded. Today, Breakpoint to us is an improvement on Wildlands in almost every way, and I'll break that down a little bit more in a second. And unfortunately, while there will always be people who compare Wildlands at the end of its life to Breakpoint at launch, that's not what this particular video is about. Today we're comparing Wildlands today versus Breakpoint today. To kick us off, Wildlands does lead the way in the environment and the map. I imagine most people would agree that the setting of Bolivia is better than Breakpoint's Aurora. In Wildlands, you're presented with a huge range of ecosystems which break up the map and gives each new region a fresh feel, different terrain to navigate, and all of this helps things from feeling samey, which Breakpoint can struggle with at times. Not only are the environments more varied and interesting, but the attention to detail is better in Wildlands, and everything from the traffic on the roads to local populations in towns and villages, and the way it all gets stitched together makes Wildlands feel more immersive and more lived in. Breakpoint does have some great areas of the map, and of the two games it has the more enjoyable base raids and enemy encampments, but it has far less varied landmass, and the local population just don't feel as integrated into the feeling of the world, and this goes a long way into how immersed you feel. Overall, Wildlands takes the crown here, and it's not that Breakpoint is bad, it's just that Wildlands is better. Moving on to the story and the narrative, Wildlands is again the better game for us. Its characters are better written, the overall story is more engaging and impactful, and the way it links you to the characters around you and how emotionally attached you become to your mission is felt far more strongly here than in Breakpoint. Wildlands constantly reminds you of how deeply drug cartels are impacting the locals. Whether it be missing people, workers being exploited, or just the violence and crime debilitating the population. It's really nice that little comms messages from your commander and dialogue from your AI team members inject little bits and pieces to ground you in what you're doing, and make you feel like you're having an impact the more you play the game. Breakpoint does have some similarities here, however the story takes place on a fictional island, and the story itself has less to do with present day issues like drug cartels, and more to do with a futuristic fight over powerful artificial intelligence, and the weapons that have been produced with this cutting edge technology. Again, there are missions in Breakpoint that have you help locals, and you do see some of the story designs that were used in Wildlands, but it doesn't come together in the same way. It's not as deep, and you don't feel as emotionally invested. On top of that, the supporting characters aren't as well fleshed out, and it's a little bit more one-dimensional. The story is still enjoyable, and the futuristic tech gives you some nice toys you can play around with, especially in the later expansions, and you do come across some nice story hooks along the way, but Wildlands does this far more effectively and far more frequently. Now we're going to look at gameplay, and from here on Breakpoint is going to take the lead on basically every other metric. For us, the gameplay in Breakpoint is just far better. It's smoother, the gunplay is better, the movement is better, the tactical gear is better, and the feel of playing is just better in every way we can think of compared to Wildlands. It just feels like the newer game, and it feels like the more enjoyable game to play mechanically. Since its release, Breakpoint has had quite a few changes, and today it really is an enjoyable tactical shooter. Most importantly, Breakpoint added the ability to modify the conditions of the world, and significantly increase the difficulty. This means that Breakpoint can basically be played in the same way as Wildlands, which was one of the main complaints when Breakpoint first came out. This means that drones can be turned off, the looting mechanics can be turned off, gear leveling can be turned off, and a whole host of other things that made the fans dislike the release are now optional. So despite having hundreds of hours in Breakpoint and Wildlands, I jumped back into both recently to make sure this review was as fair and as objective as possible. And one of the things that clearly showed me that Breakpoint was the better game was the fact that when I jumped into Wildlands it just felt old and clunky in comparison. It wasn't like jumping into a PlayStation 1 game, but there was a clear difference in the age of the game, and I struggled to get back into it and enjoy it in the same way as I was enjoying Breakpoint. This to me tells me that despite all of the criticisms Breakpoint has received over the years, it is definitely the smoother and more up-to-date experience. And for Nex and I, it's the more enjoyable one. Moving on to gear and customizations, both games allow you to select from a huge range of weapons, like shotguns, assault rifles, sniper rifles, submachine guns and light machine guns. Both games allow you to customize these weapons, and both have the flexibility for you to set up your gear to suit your playstyle. Whether that's sneaking into an enemy base and getting up close and personal, or taking them out from range with a sniper. To compare the two, Breakpoint's customization is better. The range of weapons is broader, and the range of customization options is better. In addition, if you care about the look of your character, and you want to kit out your avatar with the perfect outfit, Breakpoint takes the crown here as well. There is a massive amount of customization when it comes to the aesthetic of your character, which I love. And now you have the ability to wear what you want without it having affect your gear score, if you decide to play with the loot gear level turned on. And finally we have graphics. And it's no surprise that Breakpoint is better here. Both of these games I played in 1080p so that we could get some side-by-side comparisons, and Breakpoint is clearly the frontrunner. And given that it's the most recent game, it's not really any surprise. However, for me, I feel like the graphics and visuals of Breakpoint go a long way in closing the gap in immersion that Wildlands has because of its more detailed environment. Often Breakpoint has some really cool views, and even if you're on the ground covered in mud, the look and feel of the game does go some way to draw you back into the world that's not as deep as the one in Wildlands.
As you can see, there are a load of major differences between the two titles. Wildlands clearly had that more rounded open world experience. It's immersive in a way that keeps the gameplay fluid the whole time. However, the enemies have this uncanny ability to know where you are as soon as they're alerted to your presence. Breakpoint brings a sort of down-to-earth intensity. We needed to be more cautious and felt more grounded by the gunplay, possibly through the fact that the general movement felt sharper and the environments and animations are more detailed. The story and the moving between objectives was a bit more of a fragmented experience, breaking ever so slightly from the continuous RPG-like characteristic that's so well kept together with Wildlands. Ultimately, the history of these games are all too often factored into the opinions of them in their current state, and we think that doesn't paint the picture fairly as a direct comparison. Breakpoint's launch was a bit of a disaster, but at that time it was running against Wildlands with almost 3 years of updates and tweaks. The launch of Wildlands itself was an entirely different affair to how it is now, for example. And since its release, Breakpoint has improved immensely in all the right ways, making it our preferred of the two. In the end, both titles are worthy of their own merits in our opinion. Breakpoint may have not been the sequel Wildlands fans were looking for, but it did enough things right to stand on its own 2 feet. And for fans of the genre in general, you have 2 great games here that could definitely be worth picking up in 2022. Let us know what you think of the game in the comments below, and we'll see you in the next one.